Hello everyone. Welcome to GS Core. So we are back with our daily current affairs through MCQ. So as part of this, we cover the current affairs of today and we try and look at the MCQs. So the coverage of current affairs through these MCQs. That means what kind of questions can be framed from the today's current affairs and how they can actually pose a challenge for you in the examination. This also gives you an orientation on how current affairs can actually transform themselves into questions. So let us look at the very first question of today. Right, but before that, we have the list of topics on which the questions have been framed. The Red Sea crisis, it's in news because of the Israel-Hamas conflict. A Chalukyan Temple, something which is related to art and culture. You see, ever since the opening of the Ram Temple, the inauguration, right, the temple architecture has gained importance. So recently there was a paper of SBI or some banking exam where the question was asked on the Nagara style, right? The HCES 2022-2023. So whenever we look at the HCES, we have to look at certain elements vis-a-vis the household consumption, expenditure survey, right? So these surveys by the government are important. A language atlas by the IGCNA, right? That is also important. What do we mean by a language atlas? And then finally, when we look at the WTO Ministerial Conference 13, right? So let us quickly move on to the first question. The Red Sea crisis, and that has actually put the location in perspective. Okay, so if we look at the news, like I said, it is related to the Israel-Hamas conflict, but we are looking at the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean, right, where ships are being attacked frequently, right? So whenever some world event is in news, the location is important. For example, with regards to Russia, Ukraine, right, regions like Donbass, okay, the Russia-Ukraine border, Crimea, all those things are important. So whenever we look at the approach and skills which are needed, one is retention. Second, which is important, is the correlation, because while retaining facts, can you correlate it? And the third is deduction through the use and in this order. It is very important because without honing these skills, you cannot arrive at the correct answer. Now, if you look at the formatting, it is interesting. It's a paragraph based format, right? So it tells you a story. Therefore, these three skills get utilized here. Whether what is given as part of the paragraph is correct or not, what points is it touching upon, etc. Okay. So let us read the question. It is located between Northeast Africa and Arabian Peninsula. So if I draw a map of Africa and somewhere this is India, this is the Arabian Peninsula. So between the Northeast Africa, that is this part, and the Arabian Peninsula is a saltwater inlet connecting the Indian Ocean. It owes its strategic importance for global trade to the Bab el Mandab Strait. Again, this Bab el Mandab Strait has been in news, which lies between Yemen and Djibouti. It is one of the world's busiest cargo and oil transit points, with almost 12% of the international merchandise trade passing through it. Which of the following water body? So you see, I explained you the Red Sea crisis because it was the news and the background under which the question formed. But if this question is asked in isolation, your strong retention, right, visual thinking, so that you can think, okay, you can look at the world map, correlate the aspects which are given, trade passes, the location between Yemen and Djibouti, things like that. And then you deduce out of the options. Okay. So it is very important to see the options and read the question in its entirety. Obviously, the answer here is B because we have explained it. But how we are arriving at it is all the more important. Moving on to the next question. Consider the following statements regarding the Chalukyan temples. So recently, a Chalukyan style temple was found in Nalgonda, right? So recent news about a temple being found actually made the background for it, right? So whenever we talk about temple, there is a certain mapping which we need to remember, and I am talking about the approach, concept and the skills. So if you look at the concept, it is the art and architecture, right? The approach should be through the mapping, and the skills which we need for this is again retention, identification and correlation. This is very important, right? When I say mapping, the temple styles with features, also vis-a-vis location, DT in question and the time period and the stakeholders. When I say stakeholders, I mean who all or which dynasty actually built it. So while doing this, it is very important to retain facts, not to confuse what differs between, let us say, the Nagara school or the Dravidian school, right, or the Gujarat school or this school or that school. Okay, the identification is the key here. Now, let us read the statements. The entrance hall of the Chalukya temple is uniquely distinctive, featuring 2 or more entrances. This approach marked a distinct departure from the Nagara and the Dravidian style architecture, right? If you look at these statements, the first and the second both are correct. Okay, if you look at the Chalukya, the region primarily that they ruled was the Karnataka state and the time period was the 7th century. Okay, then they were followed by Western Chalukya, etc. And the unique features include the design of the floor, okay, projection in terms of architectural articulation and the sculpture, and they combine the Nagara and Dravida style of architecture. Okay, so if you look at the Shikhar, it is like a northern, Shikhara, while the southern Vimana features are also there. Miniature decorative towers and ornamentation on walls are some of the distinct features, right? 2 distinct features also include the mantappa, right, and the pillars. Okay, the miniature decorative pillars. So that is the part of the concept architecture, and through these skills we need to use that information which we might be having as a candidate in our information repository. All right, so like I said, that is a distinct departure. Both the statements here are correct in the sense that if you look at the temple architecture, these are the distinct features. So you see how a simple Chalukyan temple discovery has made the question on the architecture. So always remember the focus and the locus approach I often talk about. While the focus of a news item might be something, the question can be from the locus as well. So in this case, the correct answer to mark would be option C. Option C. Moving further to the next question. And this question is about the HCES, that is the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. All right. So the news item under question is that the recent HCES was out, right? So if you look at the concept and the approach, and we have the skills. So often these surveys, rankings, right, ratings, reports, they always allude to some static concept. It can be related to, let us say, education, health, employment, in this case the household expenditure, right, and further we can relate it to poverty, etc. Okay, all those things. So the concept, underlying concept and its clarity is important. Why? Because often the deduction skills are needed. How? The first statement might mention the survey, the second statement might mention the conceptual deduction based on the findings, and so on. So therefore, critical deduction skills and clarity in concepts is vital. So how do you approach such a question? While approaching such a question, always read the question carefully, right, and try and find the interlinkages, if any, right, and then we also have to look at the format. So if you look at the format, it is again how many, not which. Okay, so whenever we look at how many and the options are this, so I call it the vague format, because any option can be correct. For example, you might not know the veracity of all the statements, and hence it gets a tad bit difficult for somebody to identify. Now let us read the statements. In the last 2 decades, the share of expenditure on food has gradually declined for both urban and rural household. That is correct, because the survey says, this survey is pointing us towards that. Over the past 2 decades, there has been a notable decline in the share of food consumption expenditure allocated to cereals and pulses, observed both in rural and urban areas. So if you see, this corroborates this. Also, interestingly, you see, none is not the option. None is not the option. That means that not all of them can be incorrect. Some of them have to be correct. So these 2 statements actually corroborate each other. Over the past decade, there has been a consistent reduction in the gap between the monthly per capita expenditure of agricultural families and the overall average expenditure of rural household. So if we look at the consistent reduction, right, the retail inflation can be a cause, right? Also lower weightage of food prices in the overall inflation calculations. So you see, not just the facts, but analysis are important because they help you do the deduction. So this statement is also correct. Highest MPCE has been registered in Sikkim. So if you look at the MPCE, that is monthly per capita consumption expenditure. Monthly per capita consumption expenditure. Okay. Monthly per capita consumption expenditure. Highest MPCE has been registered in Sikkim. Again, this is also a fact. This is also a fact which has been corroborated by the recent survey. So when we look at things like that, we need to remember the findings and the concept. The correlation is very, very important. Okay. So in this case, all the 4 statements come out to be correct. Hence, the answer to mark for us would be option D. Option D. Moving towards the next question. Language Atlas by the IGCNA. Language Atlas by the IGCNA. So again, languages are important, and if an atlas has been brought about by an institution, okay, in the Indian, institution talking about Indian languages, then obviously the news is about the coming up of this atlas. Now, with regards to the topic, the concept, approach, and skills, these require immense fact and retention, right? Questions like these require that. So if you talk about language, it can again be something, in another question, it can be related to, let us say, dances, right? Because atlas is a catalog which systematically puts in or records certain languages to a particular location. Okay, so it can be related to dances, it can be related to, let us say, musical instruments, right? Or anything of that sort can be there. So the skill which is needed is fact and retention. That is the ultimate skill, because otherwise you are not able to attempt this question. If you know, you know. If you don't, you don't. So the concept, like I said, here we are talking about language. So with regards to language, it is very important that not just the concept but the dimensions. Okay, the legal, for example, the national, legal languages which are there, the national languages, under which schedule, the constitutional legal angle, right? And the concepts like scheduled language, non-scheduled language, difference between what is a language and a dialect, right? Things like that. These are very important. So the approach to this question is fairly straight. You look at the format. So while looking at the format, we can see that it is a classical format wherein which is needed. So we can use the elimination if we are certain. Never bluff. Never bluff with elimination. Okay. So let us read the set of statements that we have. All the classical languages are listed in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. Okay. If you look at all the classical languages, yes, there are 6 languages which are identified as classical languages. That is Tamil, Sanskrit, Kannada, Telugu, Malayalam and Odia. So all classical languages are listed in the 8th schedule. Like I said, legal constitutional dimension. There are an additional 200 non-scheduled languages included in the census. Now, this question is wrong on the technicality. It is the 99. It is the 99. There are 99 additional non-scheduled languages included in the census, and we are talking about the 2011 census here. So that is important. So this statement is incorrect. So if I know first statement is correct, I can rule out option C, right? I can very well rule it out. And I know the second statement is also correct. Then without reading the third statement, I can come to the conclusion that my answer is option D. However, caution, always read. Languages with less than 10,000 speakers are not accounted for in the census since 1971. Since 1971. So, like I was saying that the answer could be D, but the second is incorrect. So, again I can rule out this. So, I beg your pardon, we are left with option A or B. So, the third statement is vital to understand. Indeed, if we look at this aspect, this is correct. A native language on 1.2 million people remains unaccounted for due to the decision to not include the languages with less than 10,000 speakers in the census since 1971. So you have 1 and 3 as correct. Therefore, the answer is option B. That was to demonstrate that we should not jump the gun. The first statement is correct. The second statement is incorrect. So it automatically rules out, and hence we use the elimination. So the answer is option B. Option B. Moving further. WTO Ministerial Conference number 13. So this conference is slated to happen from 27th, right? But the WTO as an idea, the concept that we read in economy about WTO affairs, right? So there are certain things, for example, the quota, which is there, the WTO quota, right? The trade disputes. Why this is in news? Because farmers are also demanding India's withdrawal from the WTO. Now, the skill set and the approach which is needed is first retention of information, okay, retention of information, and the next is the correlation. With regards to concept, like I said, the WTO, we need to remember the aspects, for example, quota, trade disputes, agreements, etc. So let us read these statements. India has ratified agreement on curtailing harmful fishing subsidies of WTO. So to which agreements India is a party? This is important. This statement is incorrect because India still has to ratify. So through this statement, if you can retain the info and correlate with the statement, you can easily identify. WTO is one body. You can have, other global bodies, that are in the question. For example, SCO, right, EU, or any other body can be in question. So this statement is incorrect. This statement is incorrect, and we here need to find the incorrect statement. So if you look at the format, it is again the classical format. So one is incorrect, that is for sure. So that means our answer is either A or D. We can simply rule out B and C. So in a hurry, you could jump to statement 3, but you should not. Prove it logically that the statement 2 is incorrect. Agreement on curtailing harmful fishing subsidies is part of WTO's Geneva package of 2022. No, this statement is correct. I beg your pardon. This statement is correct. This thing came up recently as part of the Geneva package on curtailing harmful fishing subsidies. Remember, with regards to subsidies, if you remember the concept, India is very touchy about these issues. Okay, so this statement is correct. Agreement on curtailing harmful fishing subsidies is yet to come in force. This statement is also correct. Basically, the agenda also reflects on these particular agreements. That is why they were in news. So these two statements are correct. The first one is incorrect. Remember the operative keyword here. It is talking about the incorrect statement. And hence, the option that we will mark is option A. Option A. Right? So with this, we have come to the end of this session. You will find these current affairs which we have listed here and more as part of our daily Think You Current Affairs magazine, right, for which there is a link in description. You can download that, right? So all the best.